Thank you. I call the member for Indi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise tonight to speak about the impact of the budget on rural, regional and remote Australia, or rather the lack of information to understand what that impact will be. In the past, there has been far too little short-term planning for the needs of regional communities and too much short-term thinking and attempted short-term solutions. And as a consequence, the quality of healthcare, education, communications, transport and infrastructure have been allowed to fall behind that of other parts of the nation, leading to continued urbanisation and discontent in rural, regional and remote areas. Tonight, I call on the government to rectify this by quantifying, documenting and reporting on the impact of budget measures on rural, regional and remote Australia next year and every year thereafter. Madam Deputy Speaker, there has been a ministerial statement on regional Australia accompanying every budget at least since 1996-97, and essentially until the 2010-11 budget they summarised specifically rural, regional and remote budget initiatives. The nature of the regional statement was changed in 2011, 12 and 13 budgets. The government's agreements with the independents who held the balance of power included a commitment to a more formal and rigorous assessment of the impact of the budget on regional Australia. This involved deriving estimates of the proportion of the expenditure under, say, industry programs that would be spent in regional Australia. Madam Deputy Speaker, there were no regional statements provided with the current budget and no reason for not producing them. In fact, there was no ministerial statements accompanying this budget. In previous years, there has been a statement about overseas aid, about women, and a statement about closing the gap between Indigenous and white communities. They also ceased. So why does this matter? Why is it problematic? I believe one of the key instruments for creating the pathway to the future lies in the budget, and the ability of the community to understand the strategies and the vision behind the budget lead to community acceptance of, for example, higher rates of taxation, a budget levy, changes to specific payment levels. Without that understanding and engagement, the result is a loss of trust. And the process of effective governance, the process of engaging with the electorate, the process of setting a vision, is underpinned by the community understanding and accepting the logic of the budget. The budget is one of the key tools available to Parliament to help make the pathways to the future. And for the people who live in rural, regional and remote Australia, they have a particular interest in knowing that their government considers their interest when designing the budget. And this year, specifically the people of Indi, who I have the honour to represent in this place, feel aggrieved that this explanation was not offered. As an example of the type of impact areas which could be considered in a statement, let's consider the National Australian Development Index, a framework which covers the following areas: children and young people's well-being, community and regional life, culture, recreation and leisure, governance and democracy, economic life and prosperity, education, knowledge and creativity, environment and sustainability, justice, fairness and human rights, health, Indigenous well-being, work-life budget, subjective well-being and life satisfaction. Madam Deputy Speaker, without a process of understanding and in measuring the impacts and without clear strategies, there will be unintended consequences on rural and remote populations. For one example, I would like to draw your attention to the recent report by the Victorian University titled Education Disadvantage in Rural and Regional Schools, which presents a bleak picture for education in regional areas. Students at public schools in Melbourne and Geelong consistently have higher attendance rates and better educational outcomes than students in rural Victoria. The report finds that the gap in educational outcomes is not explained fully by the fact that rural parents are less likely to be formally educated. Rural schools are disadvantaged by having fewer resources and a shortage of specialist teachers to offer a variety of subjects. The report says that no rural or remote governance schools teaches classes in environment science, philosophy, sociology or classical studies, and any changes to education funding must take into account disadvantages to ensure that changes which may appear to impact in a minor way on city schools do not have major impact on rural schools. Another example of the differential impact of budget changes on rural and regional Australians is the proposed GP co-payment. Here I quote directly from the National Rural Health Alliance statement, Impact of a GP co-payment on out-of-pocket healthcare costs on rural and remote areas. Average out-of-pocket costs per GP service are higher in regional and remote Australia than in the major cities. In 2012-13, the average out-of-pocket cost for each Medicare rebated GP service by geographical area was $5.01 in major cities, $5.62 in inner regional areas, $5.63 in outer regional areas, and $6.08 in remote areas, and $4.55 in very remote areas. Assuming all other things remained unchanged, under the proposed new arrangements, there would be a doubling of average out-of-pocket costs for each GP consultation in all geographical areas. The new average cost to patients would be $11.67 per service in major cities, $12.21 in inner regional areas, $12.24 in outer region, $12.71 in remote areas, and $11.28 in very remote areas. These findings have to be seen in the context of the fact that rural people already postpone or avoid medical consultation at higher rates than people in the cities. And while 70% of those in major cities had skipped a medical service or medication in the past year due to cost, the percentage increased with remoteness to over 20% in regional areas and to almost 35% in remote areas. Importantly, it's likely that the impact will be more serious in regional and especially remote areas. And notwithstanding the enjoyment and satisfaction of living outside major cities, people living in rural and remote areas tend to have lower incomes, pay higher prices for basics, pay the same rates for tax, and have lower levels of access to services related to healthcare, public transport and education. These two examples in differences between regional and city populations in the area of education and health illustrate what can happen when we are not deliberate in measuring impact. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not enough to have a rural and regional budget impact statement. We must also be accountable to what it shows. These are not new concepts. Previous independents from rural and regional Australia have stressed the importance of measuring and reporting mechanisms. Better reporting of the picture of regional Australia needs to be provided by reporting regional expenditure in the budget and in individual portfolio budget statements. This will improve the accountability of government to regional Australia. The Finance Department needs to develop a spatial accounting model which will provide greater visibility into government spending and service delivery, what was spent, where it was spent and the location of Commonwealth Government positions, including forward estimate assumptions reported by regional location. This will be done for mainstream service portfolios. This needs to be done, such as education, health and transport. A website targeted with this information would make it easier for people to see the results of improved budget reporting for their region and would provide interactive opportunities for the community to find out more and make inquiries. Other public indicators of service performance and social, economic and population outcomes should also be reported. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will always be differences between the way things work in the country and the needs of rural people. And that's why I call on the government to reflect this by ensuring a rural and regional budget impact statement is the core part of the budgetary processes next year and every year after that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.